I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Glinda Zayas-Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Welcome, everyone. We have a great show for you tonight. We have Owen K. Stevens here, Starfinder design lead, Quandle on Oblivion Oath, overall RPG icon. So, let's see. How can we start with a good starting question for Owen? Owen, could you tell us a little bit about how you got started in role-playing games? I think we've asked everybody that.
So, in 1982, my parents went to Europe and decided that my sister and I were not going to go to Europe. At the time, I found this very, very frustrating. As an adult, I totally understand. So we were left with my aunt and uncle for pretty much most of the summer, and my uncle was very much a geek-related science and fantasy and speculative fiction kind of guy. And one of the things that he had, in addition to like an Apple computer with a flight simulator and Chinese checkers and a big old hoil of games, he had a first edition hardback AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide. And I love the cover on it. And he said, I've tried to read this, but I can't make any sense out of this game. If you can figure out how to play it, I'll play that game with you. So I did not know that this was at most 1/3 of a game. I just knew, hey, it says Dungeon Master's Guide. On the back, it talks about how exciting it is, that it's everything you need to be a dungeon master. So I tried to figure out how to play the game, and by going through it, I realized there was missing information, like what does a player do? But there were a lot of hints about what players did based on the information that a GM was supposed to interact with them, a dungeon master. So literally before I ever played a role-playing game, I was designing half a role-playing game so that we would have enough information so that my uncle would play this game with myself and my sister. I was very much hooked and have been playing role-playing games ever since. My sister was very much not hooked and has not played a role-playing game since 1982. And even then, she did her very best not to actually play that night. Although, she sat there and listened to our uncle desperately try and describe reasons why she would go down a set of stairs into a black, dark pit, which she thought was a terrible idea. But eventually he said she heard a kitten crying at the bottom. So she at least went down the stairs. And that's how I got started. Then it turns out my family lived in a part of town where there were pretty much no one else my age or even close to my age. And it might have ended there, except my mother could not stand that I was constantly moping about because there was no one to play role-playing games with. And she was part of a science fiction group from the University of Oklahoma. So she asked them, and they said, well, there's this game called Tunnels and Trolls. And they have solo adventures. You can buy him Tunnels and Trolls solo adventures, and then he can play without anybody. So I played D&D, part of D&D, having made up the rest very, very briefly. And then I played Tunnels and Trolls for a long time. And then I started taking those things to school. And then other kids that liked this kind of stuff saw me with Tunnels and Trolls books and with Fighting Fantasy and later Starfleet Battles. So it was literally sort of my geek flag. And the kids that liked those things are like, ooh, do you play that? I'm like, well, I'd like to play that. Tunnels and Trolls is the only thing I play. And pretty much every friend and associate, and for that matter, my wife, that I have met since has been somehow connected to role-playing games and other tabletop geek games and activities.
Awesome.
So it's really been how you've just like gathered all these people around you through the shared hobby.
Well, I mean, even now, if you go to a mall and you've got, a Pathfinder role-playing game book, and you sit there in the food court long enough reading it, there's a decent chance someone will come by and say, ooh, I know what that is. Or nowadays, you'll frequently get, oh, I used to play that in college. One of the reasons I hooked on role-playing games is that I am, by nature, an introvert, right? I can project and be excited and be engaged as absolutely necessary. And that's only because of literally decades of training myself to be able to do this. When this interview is over, I'm going to go curl up with a blanket on the sofa and not do anything for an hour, which is fine. But as a child, I had real difficulty making friends or connecting with anyone. I think through 1981, I had like a grand total of 2 friends kind of accidentally at school. As soon as I had this geek identity, this thing, and it built in an activity, right? Even as I got older, I was never the guy that wanted to go to a dance or wanted to go to a bar or wanted to go get drunk or wanted to go to a rave. So I couldn't suggest, hey, let's go do all these normal social things that people do to get to know each other. But with a role-playing game, I could say, hey, Saturday, how about we get... if LJ points out that her sofa is dead, and it's true. All right, I'm going to go to a reclining chair with a blanket. There was this activity that if they were interested in me and the things I was talking about, I would be able to say, hey, let's play Starfleet Battles Friday, or what if we run a D&D game, or any of that. And that activity became the glue through which I was able to make friends and get to know people. And of course, while other people in my life were, say, going to college and getting degrees and picking up skills, I just played games. So that's how I ended up in the industry. I had no other saleable skills other than I know how to play and talk about games. That's kind of it.
So you just mentioned how you ended up in the industry. What were sort of the first, and how you started with your quest as a game designer, just to even be able to begin to play in the first place? What were your first sort of professional contracts or things that you worked on that would be publicly available?
Yeah, so I was very much the kind of person that wrote my own campaigns and wrote my own notes and wrote my own monsters and wrote my own treasure. I was very much a homebrew kind of person. And I really, really wanted a subscription to Dragon Magazine. And here I'm talking about the mid-1990s. And we did not have a whole lot of money. And so a subscription to Dragon Magazine was really not something that we could afford. I would buy specific issues if it had something that looked like I wanted in it. And so my wife, LJ, who's a much bigger geek than I am, said, hey, look, you write all this cool stuff. Why don't you write an article for Dragon Magazine? And then when they pay you, you can use that money to buy a subscription. So this was back in the days of the self-addressed stamped envelope. So literally, I longhand wrote out in pen and pencil and paper a list of pitches for articles, and then my wife typed them up because I did not know how to type, and that comes back into the story here in a moment. And I sent it out, and there were like 5 pitches, and I was like, this is a great idea, this is a great idea, this is a great idea. They said 4 or 5, I should go with 5, and I can do an elf name generator. There, that's a 5th thing I can pitch. And Dave Gross, who was the editor-in-chief of Dragon at the time, wrote back to me, and this is weeks later, because we're talking about snail mail. You had to get it, look at it, type it in the response. And he said, so all of these other things, they don't really work well for us, and we just had, actually I picked a dwarven name generator, I'm sorry. And he said, we just did our dwarf article, but if you can write an elven name generator, that's something I could use if you can get it to me in about a month. So I thought, oh my God, I've gotten feedback from Dave Gross, editor of Dragon Magazine. If I can prove to him that I can write what he wants me to write, I'll be able to get more work in the future. So I wrote this whole thing out, longhand, pencil on paper, got the whole article set up. LJ typed it up for me. She sent it out, and I included my email on it. And because email was a thing, it was my AOL address. Email was just barely a thing. And so it was picked up. It was issue 251. I remember the issue number because the Dragon Magazine CD is issues 1 through 250. So I did the first one after that. That was my first professional thing, and I did a bunch of articles for Dragon Magazine. I did an article for Pyramid Online. I had one article that got accepted by Shottis, who then closed, D10 Magazine, which then closed, Troll Magazine, which then closed. This one article would be accepted by, scheduled for a magazine, and then that would be the first issue of the magazine that never...
The death article.
It was the cursed death article. Yeah, eventually Pyramid actually published it, so that did happen. Okay. So I got an email from Dave Gross saying, hey, welcome to the stable, you've done this, here's your check. You can pitch us some more articles if you want, and since you've already gotten something published, we'll let you pitch by email, which this was the future. It was huge. So I pitched several things, and he accepted one, and I was like, great, time to write another article. And I get my pad and my pencil, and my wife says, you can do what you want, sweetheart, but I'm not typing another article for you. If you want to be a writer, you're going to have to be a typist here. I bought you a zombie survival typing game where you have to type in what's going on as it shows up so zombies don't eat you. You can learn how to type.
You know what I like about this? Right before you said that she bought a zombie survival game, LJ typed into the chat, this is where I got devious.
She did. She really did. And she also sent me to a typing class at the More Norman Votech. But I was hooked, right? I could make money from games. That was the most exciting thing I'd ever thought of. But I could only do it if I could type. So I'm a self-taught typist. LJ jokes that I type with 5 fingers. I use these. and occasionally a pinky, and that's it. I hunt and peck about 70 words a minute. I literally have to look at the keyboard because that's how I taught myself. And I can actually stop looking at the keyboard as long as I don't realize I'm not looking at the keyboard. So if I get really involved, I'll start looking at the screen and typing faster and faster and faster. And then as soon as I think, oh, I'm not looking at the keyboard anymore, I get off the home row and everything turns into gobbledygook. But it's been good enough over the years. So that's how I got involved, and I did a bunch of Dragon Magazine articles. And then in 1999, Wizards of the Coast, it's actually first in 97, Wizards of the Coast had their Writers' Workshop. It was the TSR Writers' Workshop. And I was like, oh, this is so sad. I can't possibly go to this in Seattle, and it's expensive. And my wife said, you haven't gone to college. You haven't spent the college money that your parents and grandparents have been saving for you, and you are now a published writer. And my family loves writers. The idea of being a writer, that's like, it's nuclear scientist and right into that writer. They're all huge readers. And she said, I bet if you told them, hey, there's this writer's workshop for this company that I've already successfully made money from, they'll send you. And she was 100% right. So I went up there, and that's where I met some of the TSR people that I consider the scions of the industry, right? So Stan and Jonathan Tweet and Ted Stark and a lot of people, Julia Holden, who taught me a great deal. So someone just asked, when did Paizo pick up Dragon? 2001. So it might have been 2000. It was about 2002, I think, maybe 2003. I worked at Wizards of the Coast 2001 because in 99 they said, hey, we're hiring. If you're interested, send a application. And I was like, well, then never hire me. And I was just like, well, you didn't think you'd ever get a magazine article, and you didn't think you could type, and you didn't think you could go to the writer's workshop. So why don't we assume there's at least a reason to apply? And I did. And I am told that my application literally fell behind a filing cabinet, which is why I was not hired in 99. But they found it when they moved the filing cabinet in 2000. They were hiring again. So they did a design test where the hardest part for me was that I had to do a map and scan it. And we didn't do it in a scanner. So I'm running all around town because you're given 72 hours to write the short adventure and do a map and scan it and send it. And it's still early 2000s. Scanners are not ubiquitous. But we got that in, and they flew me out. I did an in-person interview, and they hired me. So I did that for 14 months, and then I got laid off, and then I freelanced for a long time. But, I met both Lisa Stevens and Eric Mona when we were all working at Wizards of the Coast back in 2000, 2001. So I was involved with Paizo kind of before there was a Paizo.
That's super cool.
So, did you have a favorite? You did a lot of articles in the Dragon Magazine days. Did you have a favorite Dragon Magazine article that you worked on?
I was a big fan. I did a bunch of name articles and a few language articles, and I was a big fan of all of those conceptually. But honestly, I think the thing that I liked the most was I did a series of kits, because this is for second edition D&D, so it's kind of like an archetype for people that are familiar with Pathfinder. But it's a capstone set of rules that you drop on a character class called a kit that changed it somewhat. I did a set of psychic class kits because I had a psychic psionicist character class, and those were all drawn from my home campaign. So there was a charcoal burner and a voice, and I don't remember all of them, but these were things that I had added to my second edition D&D campaign. And so they were really the first time that I had taken ideas that I had come up with for my game, turned it into an article, and got to see it professionally edited and illustrated and sort of immortalized part of my campaign. I've done it a bunch now, obviously. I suspect most designers have dropped things of their home campaigns and characters and stuff into the stuff they do. But the first time I did it was that Psionicist Kits article, which would have been sometime in the late 90s.
Oh, man.
That's cool.
That is really cool. That would have been like around when I started getting some articles, some Dragon Magazine issues, so I might have that one.
You might. That happens sometimes. We had someone a few years ago, Josh, who was an editorial at Paizo. When he left, we had a farewell dinner for him, and I was telling the story of my first day at Wizards of the Coast, where I had to run a play test for the new edition of D&D. And he was like, oh, fourth? And I was like, no, third. He was like, oh, I was in grade school. So, yeah, I've been in the industry for a bit.
But that's why you're full of so many amazing industry stories. Like I feel like every time like we go somewhere and you're just telling a different story that I just have never heard before.
I've been a storyteller for most of my life. I think I was a storyteller before I was a role player, and that's one of the reasons why I took to role playing both as a player and as a GM. Is I enjoy the act of telling a story and entertaining people that way.
So we're talking about sort of the fantasy RPGs, but you're working on Starfinder now, and I know you've had a lot of other experiences with science fiction and science fantasy. How did you sort of get into science fiction, science fantasy, things like that, and what was your trajectory through that?
So I started playing with D&D and then Tunnels and Trolls, and at that time, both D&D and Tunnels and Trolls had the sort of fantasy universe where you would occasionally stumble across a robot or a ray gun. That was just sort of part of the trope of a fantasy RPG at the time, and that significantly predates D&D, right? I mean, there's a Fafhrd and Grey Mouser story where they run into a German time traveler in a spacesuit. So that is sort of part of the pulp origin of these stories. And I was very much into the post-apocalypse genre, fiction-wise. And there were some really terrible post-apocalypse movies in the 80s and 90s, and I loved all of them. So I was very, very much into Gamma World. I was very much into Star Frontiers, all those TSR things that came out. And I was sort of and someone mentioned arguably Conan ran into a robot once, and he definitely ran into an alien in the Tower of the Elephant. So these are just all part of the same thing. So I was from the sort of group that would take Gamma World and Gangbusters and the spy one, the name of which currently escapes me, and I'll be terribly embarrassed when this airs, and D&D, and sort of mush all those things together. So I was playing with all those things on a play basis. When TSR had the game Alternity come out, I had started to have a whole bunch of articles already, and I thought this might be an opportunity for me to get on the ground floor and be thought of as sort of one of the primary freelancers for Alternity. Yes, someone put Top Secret. Yes, I am indeed embarrassed. I was thinking of Top Secret, and Top Secret is both. So I started doing articles for Dragon Magazine for Alternity, one of which turned out to be the very last Alternity article they ever ran, which Dave told me he only ran because he'd already bought the art for it. At that point, the game had been canceled, but it still came out. So I did some articles for them, and I did a bunch of free reviews of Alternity material for Jim Ward, who worked at Wizards of the Coast at the time. And then when Wizards of the Coast wanted to hire me, they said, so here are the 5 positions you could get. Tell them how interested you are in order. There's the core D&D position, which is just the base rules. There's the Forgotten Realms position, so that would be working mostly in the realm stuff. There will be all the other D&D worlds, so if you wanted to work on Mystara or Dark Sun, if we're going to do any of those. Then there is everything else we're going to license. We already have a Call of Cthulhu license, and we have a bunch of other things we're going to be licensing, so we'll have people working on those games. And then we have Star Wars. And I said, well, in order, I would rather work on core D&D, Forgotten Realms, all the other D&D, all the other licensing, and Star Wars. So I got hired to be the Star Wars junior designer. Because and my boss was Thomas Reed, and I gave them that list when they flew me out there for the interview in person. And he called me in my hotel room that night, and I knew that he was the line developer. I think project manager. I don't remember what the title for him was, but that he was in charge of the Star Wars line. And he said, so I noticed that you listed Star Wars last. Does that mean you wouldn't want to work on Star Wars? And I'm like, well, the guy that could actually give me a job is asking me if I want to work on this line. So I was like, no. It's not that I don't love Star Wars. I love Star Wars. I just like all things D&D better. But I'd be perfectly happy to work on Star Wars. And it was before Clone Wars came out, but after The Phantom Menace. So we talked about how to handle the fact that a lot of people were disappointed in The Phantom Menace and what to do with midichlorians. And the answer was nothing if we possibly can. But for several years, after I was hired, for 14 months, I was on staff on the Star Wars game. And then after that, when I did full-time freelance, I freelanced for Star Wars quite a bit. I was one of the co-writers of the third D20 Star Wars game, the Star Wars Saga Edition, with Rodney Thompson, who's gone on to a lot of really awesome design work. And the D20 boom was going. So I went full-time freelance after my 14 months at Wizards of the Coast. And so I kept getting jobs because I had done Star Wars and I had done a lot of freelance in D&D, and I had worked at Wizards of the Coast, so I was sort of considered a D20 professional. But I got work for Gamma World, for example, and I did a bunch of articles for D20 Weekly, and then when D20 Weekly was shut down, for Pyramid Online, where I would touch on science fiction tropes and superhero tropes and fantasy tropes, all that. So I got hard-coded into designing science fiction and, honestly, science fantasy, because Star Wars is not hard science fiction,
Sure.
by being hired for my 5th preferred post at Wizards of the Coast. And I have no regrets. I actually think that probably worked better for me because I was not a Star Wars expert. I had seen the movies and I had read Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and that was literally the extent of my Star Wars experience. So when Thomas Reed asked me during that phone call after the in-person interview, he said, are you an expert on Star Wars? And I said, I'm not. I know an at from a Scout Walker, but I'm not an expert. But I know what a Jedi is, I know what a Sith is, and I can read up on the rest. Having just that much information has served me in great stead over the years, right? And more than once I've had someone say, so how much do you know? Like I worked on the Dragon Age role-playing game for Green Ronin, and Chris Primus was like, so how much do you know about Dragon Age? And I'm like, well, not a lot, but I know that there's more than one kind of dwarf and that wardens can be trouble, and it's a computer game, and I can look up the rest. So I have learned that if I know just a few pieces of a lot of different kinds of fiction, I can tell people one thing that proves I know what they're talking about, and I really can look up the rest. Someone just said Splinter of the Mind's Eye was a terrible book. I love Splinter of the Mind's Eye, but it was a very different kind of Star Wars. When that came out, Splinter of the Mind's Eye is the one with the Kyber crystal, and it shows what is supposed to be the first time that Luke runs into Vader. And it was written before people knew that Vader was Anakin's father. I have, in fact, read a bunch of Zahn since then. I'm not a fan of Zahn because I don't like anti-force salamanders on PvP pipe backpacks. But one of the things that Star Wars did is it taught me how to study fiction for game material. LJ wrote in the comments here at one point, she said, "Gah, how many times did we watch those films?" When I was working on Starships of the Galaxy, one of the things I discovered is that Lucasfilm was more likely to approve you saying, here's a blob in this scene in Star Wars in a spacescape. No one's ever said what starship that blob is, so I'd like to define it. Instead of saying, hey, we want to make a brand new starship. Even though you might literally be talking about, 7 pixels that happen to be blue with a red one at the end. So I would watch like the starship fight around the second Death Star in Return of the Jedi, frame by frame, and I would be like, okay, I know what all those starships are. I know what all those starships are. Okay, that's Home One. Ooh, I can't even tell what this is, so I can say it's a starship no one's ever defined before. And there was a thing called the Jedi Holocron, which is a giant database that literally said everything that was supposed to be in every scene in every book. And so you could say, has anyone ever said this many seconds of the film that's the first appearance of a new starship? No? Then we can write that up. Trying not to lose my voice, pardon me.
Oh, good call, good
Yeah,
call.
no, that definitely seems interesting. So it was like, go to 1932 and pause here. There's some kind of a blur. Could that be our ship?
See that blur that you can't recognize? That's a different type of alien that we haven't defined yet.
Exactly that. That at the time, and we're talking about 19 years ago, that was more likely to get approved than saying I want to make something brand new that has never shown up at any screenshot before.
Someone in the audience says for the Star Wars trading card game from Decipher, they gave names to every random extra because for the same reason.
Yeah, and I mean, we did that too for the D20 game. West End Games did that for a lot of stuff. And West End Games was even doing things like, here's a piece of concept art that shows you IG-88 and Boba Fett. They don't look right, so that's not IG-88 and Boba Fett. That's IG-87 and whatever their Boba Fett clone was. I don't remember his name. They killed him later. So all of the people who were licensing stuff for a long time was very carefully saying every single thing. I mean, I think in the Cantina scene, there are 2 characters that are 2 women sitting in the back. And if you look at their long, complicated history, those are 2 women in the back who look like they're just regular barflies, but actually they're spies. But actually, these aren't those spies. These are actually 2 different women pretending to be the women that we said they were earlier. It got ridiculous.
Yeah, I remember that someone showed me an entry, I think maybe it was Logan, about Elon Sleazebagano, who's the guy who his only thing that happens in the movie is that he is mind controlled to give up his death sticks and rethink his life, and he has this big backstory, and his last name is literally Sleazebagano.
Yeah.
Does his backstory fit the name? Is he indeed a sleazebag?
Yes.
Well, you know what? That is a case of truth in advertising.
I mean, he sells death sticks, right?
Yeah, so, fair enough.
No, that makes sense. Yep, it looks like people have a lot of interesting ideas about that that trading card game on the chat, as well as apparently the Crystal Star was the bad one, not Splinters of Mind's Eye, according to. All right.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a lot of good Star Wars expanded universe fiction, and there's been a lot of bad Star Wars universe expanded fiction. So I understand, for example, Disney deciding they were going to wipe clean everything to the movies and then only bring in the stuff they found useful. I sympathize. I think that was actually probably a good move.
Yeah, I imagine at the point where you're saying, I mean, we experience this with Pathfinder too, right? The idea that once the larger the corpus of stuff that you have to research to make sure you're not contradicting gets, the harder and harder it is to write new content without possibly stepping on toes.
So we have a question from chat. Owen, who is your favorite iconic? And they didn't specify Starfinder or Pathfinder. They just said iconic.
So I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to say that my favorite iconic is our Paladin, but it's our Paladin in powered armor with a plasma rifle from the Legacy section of the Starfinder role-playing game. Because when we announced Starfinder, people said, "What can you promise us?" Because we hadn't written much of it when we first announced it. And I said, you will be able to play a holy warrior with powered armor and a holy plasma cannon. I promise you that. And so we got that piece of art to the Legacy section.
And is that iconic?
Well, it's Pathfinder iconic wearing Starfinder gear.
Okay. So it's actually Sela wearing
It is actually Sela, yeah. It's, of course, I have the rule book right here. It is actually Sela. It's just not Sela as you are used to Sela-ing her. Let's see.
Did you just say as you're used to Sela-ing her?
As you're not used to Sela-ing her.
That is, in fact, what I said, and I will stand by it. Here we go. Let's see. Where's my...
There she is. Yeah, I guess that is Sela.
That absolutely is Sela. I wrote that art order.
There you go.
And that was on my business card for a long time from Paizo. If I'm not cheating, then I would have to... Well... considering Warlock said confirmed Sela survives the gap, that could be a clone of Sela that the Greys have created in order to forward some complex plot of theirs. If I'm not cheating, then probably my favorite iconic, it becomes tricky. Honestly, it's probably Harsk. I'm a big fan of dwarves, and I kind of like that Harsk likes tea. It is such a small thing, but it does give him a very different spin. And, tea is a steep of leaves and other plant matter in water, so it makes sense for a ranger. But I don't think I've seen another tea-drinking dwarf anywhere in fantasy. And that one small thing is enough to really, for me, give a hook for what Harsk is. And I mean, our dwarves in Pathfinder are very intentionally the dwarfiest of dwarves, right? They're Norse, Celtic, Irish, gruff, heavily armored, underground. They're dwarves. Our elves are aliens from another planet, but our dwarves are just dwarves. But even within that set of contexts, our dwarf Harsk has a different kind of backstory and history, and I like that.
So, I mean, I've heard the general idea that when it comes to dwarves, more so than sort of the other Tolkien fantasy races, that people who play dwarves want dwarves to be the dwarves that they know at the core. Do you think that that's true, or?
I think you could probably make popular dwarves that did something kind of radically different. But if you're going to do that, you got to do it early, right? So when we were writing Galarian, I wrote the guide to Absalom, but Galarian was already established at that point from the campaign guide. if they had decided early on, right, that dwarves are psychic, and they like silk, and because they have underground spiders, and that's why they fight with Drow. You could have done that early on, and they could have been Asian, and they could have had katanas. There's a bunch of stuff you could have done. But if instead you have your dwarf with an axe and heavy armor and a minecart behind him, it is then too late. You have promised a certain dwarf experience at that point. You're going to have to follow through on it.
Mm-hmm. I guess that makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot of different theories of the case for dwarves.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so why don't we move on? A lot of our audience are, of course, Pathfinder and Starfinder fans. So, want to talk a little bit about how you became Modules Overlord?
I'm sorry, how I became what?
Modules Overlord. Wasn't that the name of the title on Paizo.com that you had for a very short period of time?
That is in fact the title I had.
I think it literally said Modules Overlord.
It did. That was my official job title. Because I was asked, what would you like your official job title to be? And by the way, it was after I said I wanted my official job title to be Modules Overlord that we were no longer allowed to pick our official job titles. So, from the days when Paizo was running Dragon and Dungeon, I had done a lot of writing for Dragon. And when they started spinning off Galarian, I was one of the earliest freelancers. I wrote the Guide to Absalom before there was a Pathfinder role-playing game. I believe I've got a credit in the old Pathfinder campaign setting. I was doing stuff by the time of the APG. I was doing that very, very early. And every few years, I would apply for a job at Paizo. LJ and I had really liked living in Seattle in 2000 when it was affordable. And we hadn't really realized how bad it had gotten. And so every few years, I would try and get a job out here. And around the fourth time I applied for a job at Paizo, I got a phone call from Wes Schneider, who was our editor-in-chief at the time. He was like, so Owen, I've got an application here for you. We actually have 2 jobs coming out. Would you actually move back out here? And I'm like, yeah, for the right job. I would absolutely, positively move back out here. We loved it. We would love to be out there. Last time I was moving into an unknown setting. I already have friends that live there now this time. There are people I know from Wizards of the Coast. I'm familiar with it. And so there was a question for quite a while whether I wanted to get a job as a developer or a designer. So there's a design spot open on the Pathfinder design team, which for the people that are keeping track of timing, Mark got. And that is not to say that I could have my pick of these jobs, right? It's just there were 2 open and I was being considered possibly for both. And so Eric Mona called me at one point and said, or should I lose it behind the cabinet? Now, I wanted this job. I really don't. Eric Mona called me and he said, so if I called you and I said, you can be a designer or you can be a developer, which do you want to be? And I gave it a moment of thought. I said, well, if I've got my choice, I would rather be a developer. There were 2 reasons I said that. Reason 1 was the cold, calculating, pragmatic side of me. Wes had already told me they were going to hire a developer first. So if I said I'd rather be a developer, I'm considered for that job. And then if I don't get it, I'm still being considered for the designer job. That was entirely pragmatic. But the second was, and because Eric asked me why, and I couldn't give him the entirely pragmatic reason, that would sound cold and calculating. But the other reason, which was true, was that I had already done a ton of rules design. I'd been the design element, the writer for the Wheel of Time role-playing game. I did a lot of work on the rules for that. Star Wars Saga Edition, Black Company, Thieves World. I'd done a lot of hard crunch design system work. And I said, I consider Paizo to have some of the best developers and best editors in the world. I would like to move my career forward. To do that, I want to pick up new skills. And I think the skills that I could best improve on, because I've done some development, is to be a developer. And Eric said, that's a really good answer. And then we talked about salary and stuff. And I got the job. So I moved out there. And I was supposed to be on the Pathfinder modules line. So I was going to be the modules overlord because there had not been a dedicated person whose job was just to make sure that modules came out, they were on time, the line was stable, and people that have been paying attention for 5 years already know where the story is going. And the very first module they gave me was Plunder and Peril. Now, I have never developed a module for anyone at this point. I've written them, and I've done rules elements for them. I guess I sort of developed Tempest Feud way back in 2001 for Star Wars, but mostly Jeff Grubb did the development end of that one. So this is a a 64-page module, except instead of being one adventure, it's 3 interconnected adventures. Every adventure has to be playable by itself and playable in a row. And the entire thing has to be able to exactly replace only the second adventure in the Skull and Shackles AP, because there are people that don't like all of the sailing in that one. And it has to perfectly be the tie-in to the Skull and Shackles adventure card game Season 0 organized play storyline.
Just a few requirements there, Owen.
There are 4 things that this adventure has to do. Oh, and it should be good, too. So I have never done in-office development work for Paizo, right? I've always been a freelancer, and they don't generally freelance that. And I just about pulled my hair out. I was just totally out of my depth, in deep water, kind of drowning. A couple years later, Wes told me that, a couple months in, they were like, I don't know, maybe hiring Owen for this wasn't such a good idea. And I was getting better, but I was having to learn the Paizo way of doing things and focus more on learning how to develop and focus more on the adventure story end of things. And that was a particularly complicated adventure that had things like Vic Wirtz, one of the owners of the company, would come down and be like, I'm really concerned about how you named this character because it doesn't match the card game. I'm like, okay, second day here, and I'm already annoying one of the owners. Great. And he was nice about it, right? I don't want to suggest otherwise, but it was just a lot of extra pressure. After that got out the door, the player companion line needed extra people. They'd had to move Patrick, who'd been working on it. They'd had to move him to do other stuff, and they're coming back, and they were like, well, can you help Patrick with that for a bit to get caught up? And I'm like, oh, rules. Okay, fine. So it was rules content, but it was developing rules content, and it was developing it with very much a what does this say about the fiction of the world aspect of those rules instead of what is the core part of the game system. And a lot of people think that game rules are game rules. There are some very crucial differences between what is the core engine of a role-playing game, what are the core expansions of that role-playing game where we're just talking about the basic things it can do, versus what's a new subsystem that has to tie in. That's one of the hardest things is to create, and Mark's nodding over there for a reason. What's a new subsystem that can do something new but has to tie into all the existing systems? As opposed to, how can we create new versions of things we already have, right? It is, I'm not saying it's easy to design a new spell or a new feat, but when you've got a core rulebook that says this is what a spell does, this is what a feat does, here are the parameters, what you're doing is taking an existing rules element and making it do something different. That is different from saying, hey, we need you to create a new chase system, or Alex Agunas just wrote all in caps. Well, yes, Owen, making new subsystems is hard. Alex Agunas is writing subsystems for me for Starfinder as we speak. Better be doing it as we speak. Anyway.
You just got sent back to the word mines, Alex.
He's got deadlines. Well, he has not missed deadlines on me, so I'm willing to give him, a few minutes. So I took to that a good deal more naturally. It was closer to the sort of work I'd done, and I was already over the hump of sort of knowing how to develop. And then Patrick Rennie, who's back with the company now, but he ended up going, I'm going to say, I think, to DigiPen, but I didn't keep track. It's not really my story to tell. He decided to leave the company for a while. And so I went to Eric, and I said, Eric, I know I am supposed to be the modules overlord, but you're going to need someone to do the player companion line. That appears to be a better fit for me. I'm enjoying it. I'm managing to do it on your timeline. So I wanted to let you know that I'd be very interested in taking that job. And Eric looked at me, blinked a couple times, and he said, oh, good, because we decided yesterday that's what's happening. So I'm really and then I stopped being the modules overlord and just became developer.
Well, Owen, I really appreciate your brief flirtation with being modules overlord.
Wonder Apparel was fun. Yeah, I agree.
It was a good module, but also just because otherwise I might not be here.
That is very true.
Mark took the designer test in order to get hired by the Pathfinder design team. And I did not have to take the designer test because I have been writing role-playing game rules for longer than Bullman has. And as a result, I think he just assumed he knew whether or not I could do rules or not. Fair enough. I've seen that test. Mark earned his position. I would not have aced that test the way he did. The question I remember that was the trickiest, and I may not have the details right, but you and a dwarf rogue ally are on either sides of a fire or an earth elemental, Your dwarven rogue ally is prone. Are the two of you flanking, and can he sneak attack the elemental? The answer is yes, you're flanking. Being prone does not prevent you from threatening around you, but elementals don't take sneak attacks. Most people got that question wrong. I would have gotten that question wrong.
The other problem was that they were in a grapple, and it was
There you go.
because they're in a grapple, your dwarven ally doesn't threaten anyone except the creature that it's grappling. It does threaten. So
Yeah.
therefore, normally it wouldn't threaten, but since you're flanking the one it's grappling, then that works. But the elementals are immune to sneak attack damage.
Yeah, and I'm not saying
was
Mark's
not
the
the
only
hardest
person that got
question.
that right, but I wouldn't have, and Mark did. He did a great test. And I have worked with Mark. I have worked with Mark and Linda on projects for that matter. And I've learned a great deal from both of them. Mark is the person who I spent the most time with crunching numbers and subsystems for Starfinder, because Logan and Mark were an important part of that original Starfinder core design team. And there were nights where he and I were, I think midnight is the latest he ever stayed, but there were certainly multiple nights where we were there to 9, 10, 11 o'clock. And Mark would come in and he's like, okay, I have run the numbers. This subsystem will work if you do these things. And I'm like, great. What about this subsystem? And Mark would be like, well, I'll see what I can do. And he'd go back. So I've worked with him on a lot of stuff, and his design chops are excellent. Linda has held my hand when I was having to develop Pathfinder Society scenarios, which I have only done, I think, 2. But that is its own specialized skill set. And just like I was saying, people tend to think that all design work is the same. People tend to think all development work is the same. And organized play, and not to say it's better or worse or easier or harder, but it is a different specialized set of skills, which I personally feel she has mastered and doing an excellent job with. So,
Thank you. Well, I'd say that Pathfinder Society definitely has developed this giant pile of arcane ways of doing things based on experience and feedback from fans over the years. That's just so much like, and then this is exactly how you're supposed to do these things.
Yeah.
So it's got the structure to support you in the process, but you also have to learn what the structure is, and not all of that is written down, and some of it is up here for those of us who do that as our jobs. So that really can make things tricky.
So the test is pretty hard. And like Owen said, for when he was joining in, they gave 72 hours. They give a week for this test, and so you have a lot of time. But I did my test all in one day, because on my resume, the thing I put was, you probably have a lot of people who can do design, but no one can do quality design faster than me. And the test was anonymous, so I knew that they had to grade it as one of the highest tests first before they would even de-anonymize and see it was the guy who said that he was fast. But I was confident that it would be.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it was. You're absolutely right.
Whereas I took like 40 hours to take mine.
You did.
Because I'm very slow and methodical.
That's true.
We have different styles.
And I do want to note to people, yes, you have to be able to pass muster on your resume. Don't get too freaked out about any specific part of that. One of the things that Paizo has regularly done is say that you have to have a college degree in order to get these jobs. And we've got MIT graduates on this show, right?
Hi!
Great, brilliant, absolutely sign of quality, right. And I barely graduated from high school and I'm a college dropout. So if you don't if you have a degree from a accredited school that does game design, absolutely put that on there. But if not, Dragon Magazine isn't really around anymore, at least not in the same form. But there are ways to get experience and start getting a list of credits. Because one of the things I did with my resume is I put every single product I'd worked on it for 16 years at that point.
How many
on
pages
that
long
resume.
was your resume, Owen? How many pages?
Well, I mean, it was one cover letter, 1 page of education and jobs, and I think 27 pages of credits.
27 pages of credits. That's fantastic.
See, this
So,
is why
here's
we
the
couldn't
thing.
even begin to get into
I
all
think
this
that was a stronger resume. Like, that's different.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
a way stronger resume. So it's different to not have the degree when you have 27 pages of credits. Do you know how many published RPG credits I had at the time that I submitted?
I don't know, but it won't surprise me if the number is 1 or 0.
It was either 1 or 2. Because
Okay.
of the fact that I had more than that in the works, but the third-party companies just weren't prioritizing or publishing me, other than Right Publishing, which did it super fast, was not the first I wrote, but was the first that came out. And suddenly, as soon as I got the job, all of those things that they had been holding on to and had not been finishing off got prioritized.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Arcane says.
Rogue Genius Games has a character class that was developed by Dan Dillon for 5th edition D&D. It has kind of been languishing. It would be out now that he's been hired by Wizards of the Coast, if it weren't for the fact that I'm moving, so I have been distracted. But I absolutely agree. As soon as someone that you have had as a freelancer gets hired by the company that does the game that they freelance for you, that suddenly gets way on your list of priorities.
So you just mentioned Rogue Genius. Can you talk a bit about your experience as being a third-party publisher yourself and what that's like?
Sure. Some friends of mine ran a company called Super Genius Games, and one day, one of them, Stan, in the 2000-aughts, called and asked if I wanted to write a Call of Cthulhu adventure. And I actually have this theory that every game designer should, as part of their total experience, work for either GURPS or Champions, any D&D or D20, any BRP, which includes Call of Cthulhu, any war game. That they're just some iconic games and different styles of games that you should work in as part of your total experience over the course of your career. So even though I did not really know the Call of Cthulhu rules well, I said, sure, absolutely. And that was Midnight Harvest, which was published by Super Genius Games. And then, since Pathfinder was coming out, I said, hey guys, I can write game material, but I need an editor and I need someone to market and I need someone to do layout. Would you all be interested in me writing some products and you all being the people that put them together and put them out? We'll be a third-party publisher, we'll do them in PDF, and it'll be cheap and easy. And I then wrote for Super Genius Games, wrote or developed or oversaw one product a week, every week, without fail for 4 years. Then I parted ways from Super Genius, and they bought me out, and I now had, as my buyout, a few hundred PDFs, mostly, but not quite universally, Pathfinder. And so I thought, I need my own company. And while there were all these skills I didn't have, right, I had not written marketing text when I was first doing Midnight Harvest. I had not dealt with distribution. I didn't have a drive-through RPG account. I had not done surveys. I had not done anything with layout. I'd never done an art order. Over 4 years of Super Genius Games, I got all that experience under Hiram Savage and Stan, ! He worked for WotC and TSR and West End Games before that, and was one of the people that was at the Writers' Workshop in 1997, and he's a good friend of mine now. So I thought, well, I've got most of these skills now. My wife has a graphic design degree, and she's doing layout for numerous third-party publishers now. That is most of what I need for a company, and I've got a couple of hundred PDFs. So maybe I'll start my own company. And I wanted the name to be associated with Super Genius. So I had gotten, as part of my buyout, permission to use Genius Games as part of the title of any one project I did, any LLC, without Super Genius coming after me for trademark infringement. So I created Rogue Genius Games. And I invited Stan to be part of Rogue Genius Games, both because he had some PDFs on his own, but also because the other owner is my wife, LJ, and she and I thought it would be really smart to have someone who's connected, intelligent, more experienced than we are, and a third person to give us feedback, because if she and I disagree on something, we can just go to Stan and say, here's my position, here's LJ's position. And I'll be honest with you, 3/4 of the time he says, you're both wrong. This is and we agree with him. Or sometimes he'll go, well, this part of what you're thinking and this part of what you're thinking is making sense, etc. But he's just a very intelligent and connected person, so we wanted his experience as part of the company. And so I was doing that for months, I say, before I got hired by Paizo and everything got complicated. I don't know, Rogue Genius might be a year before I got hired by Paizo. And then also in between launching Rogue Genius, getting hired by Paizo, I was hired by Green Renine, which is a job I held until 2017 as well. So there was some overlap there. But one of the things that I like with running Rogue Genius and having it is, first of all, that stuff I own. I have no problem with work for hire, and I think there's a good reason for Paizo to use that for things like game mechanics. But that means that if I have a great idea for Starfinder and I do it on the clock and they're paying me my salary and that goes into a book, I've been paid. I have no ownership to it. It's gone. Fine and fair. But I also like having ownership of something. So that gives me a body of work that I can say, these are mine. And in fact, I recently sold Overlords of the Apocalypse and Anachronistic Adventures to someone else who wanted to do something with them. So I had something that I owned and I could transfer it so they owned it, and that was an opportunity for more money. It's also a way that I can bring people into the industry, work with new people. And I often call myself the Roger Corman of role-playing games, right? We do short, cheap, mostly electronic PDF products. We're not mostly doing the big, hardback, multi-100-page books. But that means that I can take a risk on a new person. And I can say, look, I'm not going to pay you per word, but I will give you a percentage of every dollar we make. So if it's a huge smash hit, you'll make more money. We're sharing that risk together. And there are a number of people, Dan Dillon, I'm not sure if he got to start with us, but he did a lot of stuff with us before his Cyber Wizard of the Coast. Michael Sayer, who works with Linda. His very first project in the industry was with the godfather of gaming, make him a pitch you can't refuse. I have been called the game father. And that's just mostly people that have been in the RPG industry as long as I have gotten smart and gotten out. So it's not so much that I have any great special ability to be important. It's mostly just that people like Matt Forbeck and Bill Slavacek and the other people that were in the industry back in 2000, a lot of them have gone on to computer gaming or novel writing or are semi-retired and running farms, whatever. But having worked at Paizo and with Green Ronin, at Wizards of the Coast, and worked with Stan a lot, I just have a ton of connections. But I like working with people to get them into the industry, because the magazines, that is how I came up through the industry, that market doesn't really exist anymore.
Right.
I write on my own blog, both as advertising for my third-party company, for Rogue Genius, but also because, in my opinion, everyone in the industry right now who is going to advance their career needs to be their own brand. So, for example, here's Mark and Linda on Arcane Mark, which has a cool little symbol, and it's Arcane Mark, and it's brilliantly named. And this is them building their brand above and beyond the great work they do at Paizo. I think all of us need to be looking at doing that. I think it's an important part of moving forward. It's the same reason I volunteered to be on Oblivion Oath. I think there's a lot of things changing how people take in this media and how they interact with it. And I still have a great fondness for everyone else who might be out there going, well, I don't want to go out drinking, or I don't want to go dancing, but hey, who wants to sit around and watch Oblivion Oath for an hour on Thursday? I've got it recorded or whatever. I think there are new ways that people are using those geek fact flags to socialize, and I want to be part of those movements.
So speaking of which, a lot of our fans on the show are people who are really into the game, and some of them are people who want to get started writing. We've talked to them before about Pathfinder Quest in one of our other episodes. So if you guys have a pitch, I bet you could pitch almost anything to Owen, and Owen can get people writing. Well, who was the person who told you, I want to write anything except this one thing, and then you convinced them to write the one thing that they didn't want to write?
That's either Mark Sayer or Luis Loza, depending on which event you're thinking about.
Okay.
But
It's happened multiple times.
You just got to put a twist on it. So, I mean, I had Lewis Porter Jr. at one point tell me, I don't think I can sell anything but elves, and I hate elves. And I was like, well, why do you hate elves? And he said, because they're boring. I was like, well, couldn't you make elves that were interesting? And he was like, oh, of course I could. Okay, well, do that. If all you can do is sell elves, make interesting elves. And he did, and that was his own a different product. But yeah, anyone who... Here's the art of the pitch, the short version. First of all, I have a blog, owenkcstevens.com. I've got a series of articles on it called Writing 101. And those have things like, hey, this is what headers look like, and this is the function of an outline, etc. But that also talks about things like the art of the pitch. I've got several art of the pitch articles on there. But right now, you guys are all going to have my email. It's owen.stevens@gmail.com. I'm happy for that to go in the comments. And so you've got an opportunity where you could write a pitch to that email, and you can say, hey, I watched you on Arcane Mark. Okay, well, that tells me that you're paying attention in a particular way. I had this idea. Okay, cool. And how would you like to get it? You mentioned sending it to you by email. That's an opportunity for me to know that you're paying attention above and beyond. I mean, I don't want to make fun of anybody. I've gotten pitches out of the blue that are as bizarre as, and this isn't actually one of them because I don't want anyone that was ever involved in these to feel bad. But it's as bizarre as, hey, I've got an idea for a role-playing game for dogs to play. You're going to have to convince me a lot harder for an RPG for dogs. An RPG where you play dogs, sure. An RPG for dogs to play. And there are people that want to do RPGs where it's an RPG and it's about fixing computers, and it will actually be a computer repair manual.
So it's not as crazy as this, everyone, but I can attest that at one point, like, I was in a car with Owen, and I told him I had 55 classes for 3.5 that I could convert to Pathfinder. He was like, I'll accept that as a pitch. And I was like, well, Pathfinder 2 is coming out too soon for me to actually do that. And he would have accepted it if... I think you would have accepted it even though it was coming out that soon. I was just not bullish on my ability to complete the task.
I would accept it next month, right? I would expect, if Mark Seifter writes 55 classes for first edition Pathfinder, I will publish that in September. Happy as a clam. And, by the way, we'll sell a bunch of them and make a goodly amount of money.
I'd like to go back and address something that you buried in that you conveniently buried in that long statement so that we wouldn't have a chance to respond to, which is the self-deprecating comments where you were just like, oh yeah, I'm only here because I'm still around. Owen is amazing. He is multi-talented. He's great at helping people get into the industry, and he is full of amazing ideas. So I wasn't gonna let that one slide, Owen.
I appreciate that very much. And I mean, being on a show like this, this is good for me, right? There are people. This is going to be on YouTube and it's on Twitch, but I also just I have really liked that. Even just the simple name Arcane Mark and the branding is a brilliant hook for a show. And I also think the two of you do a great job keeping it flowing and being interesting and knowing your audience. So someone just said, support Owen on Patreon. Yeah, okay, that's true. I have a Patreon too. We can put that in the comments.
Yes, support Owen on Patreon.
I don't have the link, but if LJ wants to put it in the comments or Owen.
Yeah, I will put it in the comments just so people have it. But I think this is an important way to get things out there and work with people and have new opportunities. Badass Gamer Chick is my wife, by the way. So when she says, yes, support Owen on Patreon, that is not 100% But I appreciate that very much. I really do. I think your names are going to be around in this industry and noteworthy long after any specific project you guys are working on right now.
Well, thank you.
Maybe we could be the Owen K.C. Stevens of
the future.
Well, I mean, there are people that were around in gaming a decade or two before I was that I still hang out with occasionally. So I think every 20 years you get a new one or two or three or sure.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's see. We've talked a little bit about, I think, really everything except for
what you actually do in your
except
job
for
as
Starfinder design lead. The thing that's on the tag. Linda figured it out. The thing that's on the tag underneath your name there. I mean, we did get into those midnight runs where I would just come back being like, Owen, I made it through another bunch of spells, and what could we change Disintegrate so it does D20s? Is that too crazy? And you were like, it can do D20s, and I would run back. But that doesn't really get into much other than a few little days, big days, early in the process.
Yeah, I mean, I would for that project, Rob and I were both listed as design lead for that specific book, and for good reason, right? Rob McCurry, who's currently our creative director for Starfinder, and I did a lot of core decisions on like, poison, what is? And Mark then took the poison rules and had poisons and afflictions and curses all make sense, but there were some core choices there on what we're doing.
In fact, I pitched you the poison rules that you guys took. I was like, can we use the ones similar to the ones from Unchained that were actually sort of Linda's idea from before she was at the company? And you looked at them and you're like, that's a cool system to use. And then Rob signed on too, and I'm like, great, I'll get you a bunch of those. and some fun curses that do similar things.
Yep. Yeah, and someone on chat just said D20s for Disintegrate is fun. I agree. And then when we have Disintegrator weapons, as much as possible, I have those do D20s too, just so they are incredibly swingy.
I didn't even know about those because I haven't been able to keep up to date with all the new stuff. That's awesome.
We made ionic decouplers, which is a ray that damages things the way acid damages things. So it's a ray gun, but it does acid damage because it's chemically the same function. And they're called disintegrators. So as much as I can, they do D20 damage too. All right, so Starfinder design lead. There's a Starfinder team. We have our managing developer, which is my direct boss. That's Amanda Hammond. And she pretty much looks at manpower and work and tries to make those line up. She also, sets up and leads meetings, talks about all of our manager stuff, and she's great at that. She is also one of the writers and one of the developers, hence managing developer. And we have a creative director, that's Rob McCreary, who's sort of the big end. What do we and don't we want in this universe? What is the direction of this? So, it's like, okay, can we have psychedelically colored space walruses? Yes. Okay. Can we have Odiugs as a playable race? No. All right. Well, that range right there. That's Rob McCreary's call. And he does a great job with that. We have until recently had Chris Sims. He sadly just left us. And I don't know how anyone could leave the Starfinder team at a time like this. It's so sad. Anyway, he and Jason Keeley, who's still with us, were overseeing the adventure paths. And they've done a great job with having monthly. And originally we were only doing them every other month. So that's one of those cases where people said we want more of this. So we went to monthly, which is a series of interconnected adventures that can give you all the material you need to play. Then there's Joe Piscini, who is the only person whose job is simply listed as developer. I guess maybe Jason is developer. But anyway, he and I work on the hardback rules for the most part. So things like the Alien Archives, Packed Worlds, Armory, and the upcoming book, Com. And then also some of the other crunchy stuff, like I worked on the Critical Hit deck and the Critical Fumble deck. He's working on a deck right now that I don't think we've even announced, so I'm not going to talk about it because I'll get in trouble. So as the design lead, 90, 85, 75% of my job is to do development work, right? We design a product, write an outline, send it out to freelancers, pick the freelancers, get the material in, develop it, put it together, do art orders. The bread and butter work of all the things that have to be done in order to make a book a book. And this is, Linda does the same work to have adventure, organized play adventures go out. She has to write orders and deal with questions from editors, etc. Mark has to do the same thing for the hardback. That core of the work, even though there are different bells and whistles, is pretty much the same. As the design lead, basically, I am the person who is expected to understand the best why our rules are what they are. So if someone comes to me and says, Owen, why do all of our themes give you a +1 to an ability score when a +1 will, on a point buy, which is what we do, mean you'll always only have one odd numbered ability score, and that won't give you a bonus? And I can say, well, all of our feats that have ability scores as prerequisites have odd numbered ability scores. So while it doesn't come up all that often, and that's intentional because we don't want the themes to lock you in, I have to have this theme if I want to play this class, right? We don't want you to feel like I have to pick the strength-based theme in order to be a soldier. If you want to be a soldier priest, we want you to have the freedom to do that. But if you are being a priest and you want a wisdom 13 feat that has that prerequisite, and it's got +1 wisdom, and you would have only had a 12, this is where being a priest can give you that edge so that you can qualify for that feat. And we're not done building out all the feats, but you can only build so much of a game at a time. The idea is that there will be a lot of feats that have odd numbered ability score prerequisites, for even an 11, right? So there's a difference between having a 10 and 11 as I already qualify for this feat.
And the real secret is, even if you don't want the odd in that one stat, you can sort of share the wealth, right? Like, so if you get a one free point in wisdom, you put one of your points in wisdom, suddenly the amount you have left over is odd, so you can put odd in dexterity, which is where you really wanted the feat that was odd or something like that, right?
And Mark and I literally worked on this part of the system together, so that is a place where Mark also knows the reason our rules are what they are. But that is basically it being the Starfinder design lead. And, Mark's been modestly busy helping create Pathfinder 2nd Edition. So as he said, we've done things since he and I were working on the core rulebook that he doesn't know about. So my job is to know about all those rules decisions and be able to talk to people about them and explain them. And then if we have a question like, hey, can we write new roles for Starship Combat? One of the new player roles. I am the first person that they go to that says, can we do this? What are the consequences? How much space would it take? Is it a good idea? That doesn't mean that I've got final say or veto power, but as the design lead, when we are talking about design questions, rule-based questions, I'm the person whose job is to keep track of those things.
So at the banquet, I think those were announced, right, for comms?
We announced that they were going to exist, and we said what the magic officer's name was, and we didn't say what the name of the other one was.
There you go.
But yeah, so that part of that question was, is this something we can do? Is this something we want to do? Or the other direction, right? Hey, we've discovered this problem, and I'm not going to call out any problems, but, when you make a role-playing game, sometimes when tens of thousands of people play it, instead of no matter however many you can get the playtest, behavior develops, weird cases come together, something that you thought would work one way didn't. So you can say, we have noticed this problem that we're not getting the reaction we want, or the behavior we want, or this interaction is weird. The other place where being the design lead comes in is they'll say, here's the problem. Is there a rules design solution available? And if so, what would it look like?
That makes sense. And I think that's a good explanation for our fans about what a design lead does. So another thing you were mentioning when you were talking about Chris Sims is like who in the world would leave the Starfinder design team? So another thing that has been on the internet recently as well is that Owen, you're leaving the Starfinder design team.
I am leaving the Starfinder design team. My last day at Paizo will be July 12th. Com ships to the printer July 12th. So I will be through the last day of the character operations manual. My wife LJ got a great job offer in Indiana. The cost of living in Indiana is 38% of what the cost of living in Redmond is.
Congratulations, LJ.
What?
Congratulations, LJ.
She might have started watching something other than me. It would not surprise me if she got bored.
There she
Oh,
is.
no, there she is, yeah.
So it's just and I can go back to being a full-time freelancer. I can freelance from anywhere. So I'm not leaving Paizo because I don't love Paizo anymore, or I don't love the people anymore. This has been my dream job, and it's a job, it's work. You have to pay me to go there. That's the point of a job. They don't have to pay you. It isn't a job. But I'm not leaving because I don't love it anymore, or love the game and love the people. I'm leaving because I feel like there is a better situation for me and my family. And as much as I prioritize my coworkers and my own personal career and the game and my love of the game and the culture around the game, what's best for my family does take priority.
I think 38% is a lot less. I mean, if we could all move out there with you, Owen, and keep you on, then we would all have to pay only 38% of the cost of living.
The mean house price in Redmond, I believe, is $820,000. The mean house price in Evansville, Indiana, where I'm moving, is $115,000.
Yeah.
I can pay the mortgage on a house there, on a 2,500 square foot house, for less than my rent for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath here in Redmond. It's extremely expensive, and it's not that there's no reason to be here, right? Wizards of the Coast is out here. A lot of game companies are out here. A lot of the core elements of Green Ronin is out here. Privateer is out here. There's a lot of companies and a lot of game culture that you can draw from here. But wow, is it expensive.
There's a cluster of apartment complexes within walking distance of Paizo that we jokingly call the Paizo Barracks. And a pretty high percentage of us live in 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom units in those apartment complexes.
And teaming up to handle rent.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally.
You'll see some people, when we interview them, might have a background that looks very similar to ours. Owen's somewhere slightly different, but...
You may see this exact door in the background of someone else in the future.
What you see right now is all my boxes because we're packing.
Right.
But I mean, one of the things I do hope to do is get out there and stabilize my financial situation and make sure that everything is good. And then maybe start trying to create a game designer / creative person commune, right? I mean, we could literally get a house with 3 or 4 spare rooms. We've got friends in Oklahoma who would love to be in a more creative area, but that cannot afford Seattle, right? Someone in the chat said I work for a company as a developer and it's a dream job, but I adore freelancing and getting my own stuff out there as well. Yeah, I am still going to be in the industry, right? I freelanced for Paizo way before I was on staff. I expect I still will. I think at last count, I have 14 offers for big or long-term projects. I'm just not taking any of those until I'm actually out in Indiana and know what my life is actually going to be like out there. Because the last thing I want to do is agree to do 5 things and discover they all take 50 hours a week.
Well, whenever you want to write more stuff for Paizo, the contracts will fly your way. So
it looks like Kylie says Evansville has decent farmland as well, so you could get a few acres.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at houses. When we were looking at moving to Evansville, right, there were a few questions. Is there a game store? Yeah, there's a nice big game store. Great. There's a friendly local game store. Is there a movie theater? Yeah, there are like 3. Okay, good. We didn't ask this question, but we discovered, is there indoor blacklight mini golf? Yes, there is.
Okay.
And I'm totally going to that. So,
but would you own the mineral rights to those acres of farmlands? Because that's
almost certainly not. But I do own the mineral rights to 160 acres in Roosevelt County, New Mexico. So I can and I don't own the surface rights to that, just the mineral rights. So I will hold on to the mineral rights of land that my family has owned for 3 generations that no one has ever laid eyes on. I'll hold on to those mineral rights and then have surface rights in India.
There you go. So, if anyone is wondering why I asked that question, I knew that Owen had those mineral rights because he had mentioned it before and some of the crazy things that happen when you have mineral rights.
It's weird. It really is. I have been paid for people to not drill for oil on my land.
All right. So, does anybody else have any additional questions that you want to ask Owen? You have Owen's ear right here, right now in this
both of them.
interview.
Yep. Any questions?
Both ears.
We got a D20s are dwarf seeds. I'm going to say yes. Have you packed the microwave? No, I have not packed the microwave. The movers are showing up Tuesday, and until Tuesday, I want to be able to conveniently microwave food because once the microwave's gone, I'm going to be here for 10 days with 1 rickety office chair, 1 folding table, and 1 bed. And I bought myself a pizza cutter because we don't own one, and that way I'll be able to just throw pizza in the oven so I can have hot food. But mostly it's going to be sandwiches. So since the packers the movers are showing up Tuesday, I expect to pack up the microwave Monday.
Okay.
If you have any new products in the Rogue Genius family who wants to promote, we actually hit pause on Rogue Genius. I know that we are going to be releasing the Time Thief for 2nd edition Pathfinder. I'm very excited to do that. We previewed the art of it. And there are a bunch of questions, so we'll get to all of these in just a sec. We previewed the art of it on Facebook, and I'm really happy with our new art. That will probably be, I can't say a day 1 release because I don't know what it's going to take to get these things put together, but I absolutely expect to be supporting 2nd edition Pathfinder and 1st edition Pathfinder. Got distracted early on. Did we answer the Quandle pickle types? I don't think we did cover the Quandle pickle types. So, I mean, Quandle's my character in Oblivion Oath, and his hashtag has become Pickles are Magic because to Quandle, pickles are the perfect food. They're preserved, but they're not dry. They're tangy, but they're not spicy. They're juicy and have a whole lot of flavor, but that flavor does not totally overpower the base flavor. So, to Quandle, pickle is like saying barbecue, right? Anything that has been preserved in a pickling-type juice to him is a pickle. So he has medicinal pickles because he was trained by a goblin alchemist. So to him, medicine is and you boil the pickle juice, it becomes antiseptic. The leaves that you boiled in the pickle are antiseptic leaves, so that's bandaging. But he's got pickled pig ears and pickled turnips and what he calls pickled pickles, which are pierced cucumbers, and pickled onions, and that might be it. I believe he has passed out. Yeah, I was just saying, not all of his pickles are cucumber based. I believe in today's game he passed out the very last of his non-medicinal pickles because we've not been able to restore his supply. So I don't know how that's going to go for him.
So I think the next question on the chat is, what's your favorite aspect of Pathfinder's 2nd edition?
My favorite aspect of Pathfinder 2nd Edition is that, in my opinion, it has fixed multi-classing. I love multi-classing. I love multi-classing as a way of having characters be more complex than a single description. And again, I go back to sort of that old pulp fiction where Spofford has been a barbarian and a priest and a rogue. And the Grey Mouser has some wizard training and was trained by Nigable of the Nine Eyes, but is mostly a thief. And no previous D20 game, in my opinion, has done as good a job as what I have seen from Pathfinder 2nd Edition and Quandle Multiclass. I told people that at 2nd Edition, of being able to say, hey, I am an A, and I want to take a little bit of B, and I want that to remain relevant throughout my career, but I don't want to give up on good stuff about being an A. So you can say, I'm a fighter, and I want to learn just a little about being a wizard. Well, you can pick just a little about being a wizard. The classic bad example in most D20 games is if I am a wizard and I want to pick up just a little cleric. If you split your spellcaster levels in most D20 games, you are specifically making a weaker character. In fact, in 3.5, that's why they created the Mystic Theurge. And even that is sort of weaker. Oh, I've hit this tipping point where I have so many low-level spells that I'm probably more powerful, but I don't remain balanced with everyone else. And two imbalances is not the same as a balance.
Yep.
In Pathfinder, I didn't just answer the action system. I love the action system, but it's not my favorite part because I have seen action systems that worked well before in D20 games, except for one. This, to me, is the best fix for multi-classing, and it's going to work for multi-classing, and it's going to work for archetypes, and it's going to work if we wanted to create like regional variations on things. I got very frustrated when the Arcanist came out. I was working at Paizo at the time because I liked the Mangambian Arcanist archetype. And an Arcanist class could not qualify for the Mangambian Arcanist archetype. You had to be a wizard to qualify for the Mangambian Arcanist archetype. So I was running the player companion, and I made a Mangambian Arcanist for the Arcanist. So that's exactly the sort of problem we will not run into in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. If they decide, like in the playtest, they had a Cavalier, which uses the same basic rules as the multi-classing. You could say, hey, I'm a wizard from a horse family that we are like, fireball dragoons, right? We go riding into combat and then we cast spells. You can drop a Cavalier on wizard and it still works. Someone in the thread just said you can cut back on the number of archetypes like crazy. Right. We don't need one flavor of pirate for a rogue and one flavor of pirate for a fighter and one flavor of pirate for a ranger. We can say, here's a pirate. Take whatever pirate you need. It also means that archetypes can be built to be flexible in a way they could not in first edition, right? We can say, hey, here's the archetype. Here's all the things an archetype might get. You won't be able to pick all of those, but that means that your human fighter pirate may look very different from their human fighter pirate in all aspects of that, right? Even though you're both humans, you're doing different human-themed things. Even though you're both fighters, and now I'm just doing this.
Right.
And we could even then expand archetypes, right? If we said, hey, here's the Cavalier, hey, we want to throw in some samurai stuff. We don't have to build, hey, here is the samurai alternate class. We can say, here are samurai themed feats for the Cavalier archetype. You can take as many or as few as you want.
In fact, as Luis mentioned on his interview, we've already expanded some. So, absolutely. Expanding archetypes, and especially when you were talking about pirates, there were a few pirate archetypes, but let me tell you, there was like a gun archetype for like every class.
Yeah.
In Pathfinder First Edition. Now, hey, if Gunslinger is a class, the Gunslinger multi-class archetype fits the bill. So I'm super happy that that's your favorite, Owen, because that was something that as soon as Jason gave the basic idea for archetypes in general, I was super pushing for that to be the multi-class system. Because while there are things I definitely like about the Pathfinder First Edition multi-class system, I just feel like that it is a system that punishes me all the time for doing what I want, and then occasionally shows me something so good that I'm like, oh, I still love you, Pathfinder First Edition multi-classing system. But the second edition system just lets me make the kind of characters I want to make.
I mean, going all the way back to first edition AD&D, right? Hey, we're first level characters. Well, I think we're only going to play this game twice, so I'm going to be a fighter, magic user, thief. Because I'll be a first
Yep.
level fighter, a first level magic user, and a first level thief.
Absolutely.
Oh, we're going to get to 15th level? Oh, suddenly this isn't nearly as good a choice.
Yep. All right, let's
what's
see.
our
What was the next question?
How long will Quindle be on Oblivion Oath?
Well, we have no game next Thursday, and I plan to be on the Thursday after that, which would be the 11th, which is the day before my last day at Paizo, and I'm not saying after that. Pullman and I and Dan, who's our producer, have had a conversation about it, and we know what we are and aren't going to do about it. And I am really going to tell people, if you want to know what's going on with Quindle and the fact that I'm leaving and how that might affect the game and the other players and the scenario, watch.
All right, that makes sense. So there was another one. Is there going to be a significant conversion of the Pathfinder First Edition Rogue Genius products to Pathfinder Second Edition, or a larger focus on new content?
We are almost certainly going to take some of our most popular stuff. I mentioned the Time Thief, for example. And here's where I get to talk about the action economy. I'm so excited about how I can take the Time Thief themes of being able to do more or less in the same period of time and map that to the 3 action economy, because I can do, one of the problems is if you just do like haste, doing first edition or D20 haste, you can use that for anything, and that can be super broken. And the 3.0 haste was super broken.
It was so broken.
An extra standard action, so suddenly every spellcaster is casting 2 rounds spells around. But
I remember a group that made the 3.0 haste a 9th level spell, and it was the most powerful 9th level spell.
yeah, it's still good, absolutely. But I could, with the 3 action economy, I could do something like, hey, you've got a running through time ability. 1 action, move up to 3 times your movement. That's not broken if there's some, it's got to be a resource or a cost drop, and you can do it or whatever.
Sure. I mean,
if it's a focus ability, right?
The
so
monk
you're
can do that
up-
already, right? As a focus ability in the playtest with
Right.
with Key Rush. So
that's the sort of thing that I could even say, hey, run 4 times your speed at a higher level. So we can say, hey, this is taking you 1 action, or this is taking you 2 actions, or whatever. And I have not actually worked on that design because I had the access to the rules for Oblivion Oath, and that is Paizo, and therefore I could not do Rogue Genius work because Rogue Genius did not have access to the rules. So I have only given it what thought I could with the rules I had available to me as Rogue Genius. But like the 3 action economy was in the playtest. And as I announced at PaizoCon, there's a method for third-party publishers to try and get advanced versions of the rules. And so I can go through that mechanism with everyone else. And if I get the rules early, I would then presumably be under an NDA, and I wouldn't be able to tell anyone I had the rules early. But the point is, that is when I can get that stuff done. Yeah, Time Thief seems amazing with the 3 action economy, totally. So I'm sure we'll do the Time Thief. We've had requests for Godlings and Dragon Riders and Death Knights, so we will probably do those. But there will come a moment where I'm going to want to say, what does this set of rules allow that I think is interesting, that I think is fantasy focused, that I think would be fun, that I could not do, or I could not do as well in first edition. So I suspect there will be a mix of things, but I'm moving. So we hit pause on, I also do work for Wright Publishing. We hit a giant pause button because we just need time to pack things up and get out there and get set up and see what things are like. It's a big change in my life. I expect that there will be a lot of third-party stuff from Rogue Genius, but of course, if different game companies suddenly buy up all my time again, it might be back to a trickle. We'll just have to see how it works out.
So the next question is, what is your opinion on leshies?
Okay, so when I was working on Plunder and Peril, one of the remits for that was that it was supposed to be pirates, but funny, like Pirates of the Caribbean. And that's something that Wes Schneider wrote into the outline, and he later said he regretted. So I was going through and there were some fights that weren't balanced, and so at one point, I decided to have a fight where you were attacked by 3 seaweed leshies that leaped out of the oceans, and they were this tall, and they had the right CR to kick your butt. And Wes called me in, and he was like, so this isn't a rules thing. The CR is right. The fight will give you the right experience. But that's just not a super serious encounter, right? That's a bunch of little seaweed creatures leaping out, and they're going to be on your face, and people are going to make funny voices. And I'm like, yeah, you said this is supposed to be a comedy adventure. He's like, forget I ever said that. I regret it. Don't make it a comedy adventure. I think Leshies are much like Isoki and Ewoks and Jawas and Kender and Halflings and Gnomes and the mice in Mouse Guard as opposed to some of the bigger races. There are some people who are going to love putting those into a campaign, and we want to have good rules for those people. And there are some people who are stick in the mugs who won't want to use them, and they don't have to.
That makes sense. But which one are you?
It depends on the campaign. I mean, I loved having a Lechi Luchador in the last Pathfinder game I was playing, but that was a sillier theme of game. I mean, we had a paladin who was a catfolk wearing a tuxedo. That's fine, but if I'm going for a more Lord of the Rings kind of feel, then I might not want to use Leshies. I think Leshies are one of those things that even if we're saying, hey, it's high fantasy, it's low fantasy, we're using Pathfinder, there are different genres even within those. And Leshies are great for some, and I love them for those things. But I think they are automatically a little cuter and sillier. And if they're the only cute and silly thing you put in, great, fine. But then maybe take out, mouse folk or whatever. They're on that scale, and if you pile up enough of them, you have turned your game into a Saturday morning cartoon. I love Saturday morning cartoons, but that's not the only thing I want to play.
Fair enough. The next question is, are you GMing any games right now?
I GM a solo game for my wife, and she is very sad that we have had to put it on pause. And that game has been going on since 2004, I think. So that is 15 years at the moment. It's on the third generation of her characters. But that's the only thing I'm GMing right now.
All right. And then another question was, how many boxes of purely of RPG game books does it take to move the Stevens household?
I think at this point about 10. It was more than that before we moved out here. LJ said 50. Sure. You packed more of them than I did. A lot. It's a lot of game books. And I've been cutting back on my game books for more than a decade, right? Like, I don't have most of my 3.0, 3.5 books anymore.
All right. So, let's see. I think that we've answered all of the questions for everybody. So thanks for your questions, everyone in the Arcane Mark community. Owen, thank you so much for joining us for this interview. It was great to have you on the show.
I had a great time. Anytime.
All right. Well then, everyone, as we mentioned before, we will have another episode on Saturday about new beginnings. And we'll let you know about next week's interview on Thursday. Next week on Tuesday is going to be the Mysteries Investigations. So, bye everyone. See you next time.